Now in its third year, it's a Yank on the Footy with Craig Wessels, talking about the greatest game on the face of the earth. Sit back and enjoy, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 196 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels, coming to you from Sandusky, Ohio, and thanks for giving the episode a listen. In this episode, part one of a two-part interview, I am joined by former Kangaroo player and marketing manager Barry Cheatley. This was an absolutely delightful discussion. I truly enjoyed sitting down and talking with Barry, a fine gentleman, just an absolute treat to talk with him and hear the wonderful stories that he had to share. And I will be releasing part two of this interview very, very soon, probably within the next 24 hours, as I'm working on getting both of these up and ready to go. I did leave it with a little bit of a cliffhanger in our interview, which I don't think I've ever done a cliffhanger before, and I'm not a true crime podcast, although that's the type that I love to listen to. But I kind of leave you hanging at a point where you have to come back for the second episode of this one in order to find out what happens with it, though. So, folks, don't forget that if you want to get your local footy club getting a shout-out during an upcoming episode, drop me a note via email, shoot me a message over on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find links to all of those things over on my website, yankonthefooty.com. I do hope you'll head over there and get signed up on my mailing list. I do hope that you will also consider, if you've got a great story to tell, and again, with the men's comp winding down here in the next few weeks and the women's comp ramping up, I still plan on doing interviews throughout the summer months in Australia. So if you've got a great story to tell, I absolutely would love to talk to you. So please head over to my website at yankonthefooty.com and register as a guest. Now, today's club of the episode is sponsored by the MickAussie.tv channel. And MickAussie.tv is run by Kim Harrison, as we call him here, Mick Aussie, in North America. He has spent the last 2 decades and a little bit more running his sports comedy channel, talking about the NFL, the Canadian Football League, the AFL, of course, as well as the NBA, the NHL, and I think even a little bit of baseball from time to time. He also appears regularly on Sports Grid TV with Gabe Morency, and Mick was a terrific footy player himself in South Australia as well as in the Northern Territory. And this week's club of the episode are the Redan Lions of the Ballarat Football League. And this was actually a club that Barry Cheatley played for in his youth. The Lions were founded back in 1871, and I can't recall, I've been doing it, shout-outs to clubs, to local footy clubs, if you will, for quite some time on the podcast. I can't recall one that was founded earlier than 1871 that I have mentioned. And if you happen to have one, please let me know, because I'd love to give them a shout-out. Collectively, they've won 59 premierships, including 11 senior premierships. The Lions do play their home games at the City Oval in Ballarat, and hopefully you'll check out their website. I'll put a link on here for you to check that out. And let's go ahead and dive into my first part of the chat that I had with Barry Cheatley. I think you're going to enjoy this. If you're a Roos fan, I think you're going to love it. If you are somebody who's been following the game for several decades, he spent, we'll get into it, spent quite a bit of time working for the Roos after his playing days were done. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am absolutely thrilled to have my guest joining me this morning. He's described as, on the back of a football card that I saw, a hard-nosed fullback for the North Melbourne Football Club in the late 50s and early 60s. And he later on went to lead the marketing department of the North Melbourne Football Club beginning in the 1970s into the early 1990s. I am thrilled to welcome Barry Cheatley to the podcast. Barry, thanks so much for taking time out of your morning, sir.
My pleasure.
This is going to be a great time. I want to give a big shout out to your daughter and to Dom for helping to set this up. Now, you began playing, and I consider myself to be almost a senior citizen myself. I'm 59. So you started playing a couple of years before I was born, but You debuted with the club in 1959. Got your first 2 games, both of them wins, if I read that correctly.
Well, it was an unusual situation because I had been living in a country town called, well, it's really a city with well over 100,000 people, but called Ballarat. And whilst I had previously signed to play with another club, that particular, they call it a Form 4, it had expired. And through friends that I knew in Ballarat who had already played with North Melbourne, I went down to a training session early in 1959. And at about the same time, I had enrolled and been accepted to join the state the Victoria Police Force. And I went to a training anyway. To make a long story short, I signed to play with North Melbourne. But I had 6, what they call 6 match permits from my team in the country to play that first year. So I did. They didn't give me my clearance to play. So I played 4 with what we call the reserve 18. And the 5th and 6th rounds of that particular season, 59, where they'd done very well the previous year, 1958, I was on a reserve. I was on what they call, they've changed the rules now, but I was on a reserve, on the bench, in other words, 19th and 20th man. And the first game was round, on the 20, it was round 5, it was against a team called Fitzroy at Arden Street. I didn't actually get on the ground at all that particular day as reserves. I did the following week. And yes, they were wins, but not not with me participating. And then I went back to play where I could with my original team. So my first full season was to be 1960, and I started with my first senior game as such, named in the team, and played in the team in the round 2 of 1960. And I started in another position, but at quarter time I shifted me to fullback. The position of fullback, right back in saving the goals, in other words. And that's where I stayed for the next 79 games, making a total of 81 between 1960 and 1964. And Craig, I often get asked what sort of a player I was, and I've pinched a statement from a late, great, well-known player here in Australia from Richmond called Jack Dyer, and he once described another player as, and I like the saying, so I class myself as a very good ordinary player.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were above average.
Well, yes, I think you could say that. I never got dropped. I never lost my position. So yeah, very good ordinary player. So I enjoyed all that. It was that I had the opportunity to play with and against some very, very well-known players, which I often mention, not today, it's not appropriate, but type situation. But I was very fortunate. People say lucky, but I was just very fortunate to be able to play with and share the field with so many well-known then, of course, players, many of whom are still alive, although they're getting elderly. I'm closer to 84 than 83, but that was my playing days. And then I actually was only 25 when I retired because I was working. At that stage, I'd left the Victoria Police Force, the State Police Force, and joined an American insurance company, which was only new into Australia. And many of your listeners, I would be surprised if somewhere along the line they might contact you. I worked for a company called the Combined Insurance Company of America. Later on, they changed the name in Australia to Australia, but it was started, the founder of which was a very well-known American who lived to a ripe old age, I think, of about 100. And if you Googled him yourself at some time, great author, and a person named W. Clement Stone, who was associated with a guy called Napoleon Hill. And Napoleon Hill was the author of a book called Think and Grow Rich, self-help book. And I was very fortunate to be. They taught a great culture. They had a great philosophy based on the PMA, positive mental attitude. So, yeah, I'd be very surprised if some of your listeners didn't either work for and or know someone that worked in America with the Combined Insurance Company of America under W. Clement Stone. So, yeah. So I went to Sydney then after a couple of years, and that's where I went for 7 years. Our children were born up in Sydney. And then I returned back in 1970, mid-71, and later in 71, I was appointed the full-time, I had a different title, but we'll call it marketing manager for my first full season in 1972, Craig. And my job was simply to raise money, to market the club, yes, but more so to raise money from sources outside of the normal sources of income that the club had at that particular time.
Okay. So, back to your playing days here, just
Yep.
a little bit.
Yep.
You you played basically 5 seasons. You averaged around 16 games a season during that time.
Yes. Yes.
Now, when you said that first year, you mentioned that you were only allowed to be contracted to the VFL for 6 games. So
That's right.
you were still tied to the local club, right? They said go ahead and explore, see if you're good enough, see if you're above average, as we talked about, and see if you can maybe fit in there, and then maybe next year you can take that spot. But we're not ready to quite give up on you because you signed on to play with us, correct?
Well, yes, that's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
The truth of the matter was that I knew about the situation because the club had been very successful just prior, particularly the previous season in 1958. They'd made the final. We had a final four then. Currently, it's a final eight, but what you call over there the playoffs. And I couldn't see myself really in the team on a constant basis because of that success. And I think they put me on the bench at that time to sort of, I don't know, to assist in making a decision that to entice me to hopefully my club would clear me to play. But I was happy not to because I couldn't see myself. As it all turned out, well, we'll never know. We did have a lot of injuries and I probably would have been able to play several games that year. But what actually happened, history proves I didn't. And I was granted the clearance at the end of that year. I had a good rapport with my club and I still go and see some games with that particular club called Redan, REDAN, in the Ballarat Football League, about 100 Ks from Melbourne. And so my first full season was 1960. And yes, I've averaged about that. I only missed a few games from injury. I think I had 2 seasons where I played every game, being 18. We didn't play in the finals, but so that was my time as a player with the club that I was later to work full time for.
So who was the toughest opponent that you ever faced? Who was the player that you went up against that you were and get ready for that first bounce? You're like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, Craig. And yes, there were several, and I don't ever put them in order, but probably the late, a guy called John Peck, PECK, played with Hawthorn. I played against people like Doug Wade, who was then with Geelong, the Cats, but then later, strangely, came to North Melbourne under the 10-year rule. A guy called Ron Evans, who later became the chairman of the Australian Football League, or even people like Murray Weideman from Collingwood, and Gary Young from Hawthorn, Bill Young from St Kilda. So there were just a few that I played against, but probably in answer to your question, the toughest player, he called a spade himself, was probably John Peck. I think I was able to hold my own against those people, those players, etc.
Okay.
But it was, so we did a bit of homework beforehand, probably not to the extent of where it would be all done for you nowadays, but we always knew who we were going. I always knew who I was going to be. My opponent would be the following week, because it was pretty obvious. If they were a recognised full forward, the person responsible for kicking goals and contributing there too. Yep.
So looking at the game in the present day, and I'm not sure how much football you watch today.
I watch a lot.
Okay.
A lot on television, and I go to all of our, just about, not interstate nowadays, but I try to go to all of the North Melbourne Football Club's home games here in Melbourne. So I watch a lot of football, both live and on television. I don't quite enjoy that, but the games are just so, the game play, or the playing the way it's just, today, from my era, the game's just so much faster. They train a lot harder. They're full-time players, some of whom are earning, well, I think the players cap in my team's cases, I'm not sure what the total is, but I think divided by 42, and you're talking about 350,000 Australian dollars per year. some of whom are getting $600,000, $700,000, Australian dollars a year to play. But the skill level, mind you, it's gone fully professional. In my day of playing, the base rate was very, 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 very low, well, and everyone had a full-time job. So it's become tremendous change. So today the game is so much faster, they're so much fitter. The skill level where most players can kick either feet, hand pass either hand. Their fitness level is just so much. And I guess that would be true when you look at, say, even gridiron. Take that as the example over there.
You're absolutely right.
Would you say that the players today in gridiron from 60 years ago are a hell of a lot fitter?
I would say that a lot of them are. I mean, they're a lot larger in many cases, yes, because you have offensive linemen who were there blocking, who some of them are 330, 340
yes,
pounds. I mean, they're large human beings.
Yes.
Yeah. So, is there anybody in the game today that you watch that you're watching them playing defense and you're thinking to yourself, that looks a little bit like how I played the game? Is anybody that you think reminds you?
Yeah, I guess there are, but it's just so different. The difference being that in my day and preceding that, and for a little while after, we call it one-on-one, where I'd be playing on a full forward, being position being full back, centre half back would play it on the centre half forward. So it was one-on-one. I'm not saying there are only ever two people contesting the ball, going for a mark or whatever. But nowadays, that's one of the big changes where it's become so much more a team sport with so many people. In fact, I don't particularly like it, but there are several times during our games where all of the 36 players, 18 on each side, are on the field, and they're all in one half because there's no restrictions. You can play anywhere on the ground. I think, and therefore, to most people's thoughts, it's overcrowded, and I reckon in due course they should consider changing and ensuring that X number of players remain in one half of the ground. And they often sort of say it, but that's the way it is, and that's the way it's played today.
And I think in a way they tried with that 666 rule. They tried to do that sort of thing because maybe their thinking is that that the players that are at one end of the ground are thinking, well, I don't want to waste an awful lot of energy to run 150 meters to get inside the other 50-meter arc to just have to turn around and come right back again.
Yeah.
So
maybe... Well, it's changed. It's really, that's probably one of the biggest changes. It's just so much faster. And and the difference in training, but we are talking in my particular case, 62, 63 years ago.
Right.
But they're just so much fitter, and it's an entirely different game, and there's so much more involved, or there seems to be, and there's more assistant coaches. There's I think it's overcoached sometimes, but that's the way it is. And I suppose that would be true in many other sports, but become very, very much more professional and being full-time. That's the biggest difference, Craig, one of the biggest differences. All the players nowadays, I wouldn't, because they're all very well paid as such, and there's no need for them to have a profession besides. Some of them, however, along the line are being a lot, smarter. They are looking ahead because they're going to retire sometime during their early 30s. They're about there too. And they should give consideration, which the clubs do provide, a situation where they should be considering what they do, and they get financial advice, etc., etc. But the game is in good hands. Whilst we, I think it's over administrated perhaps, and they change the rules from time to time, in my opinion, for the sake of changing. But that's the way it is.
Sometimes they change the rules during the course of a game.
Well, not so much in the course of a game, but that they have. You're quite right. From time to time this year, they've actually changed the rules not every week, but one week they'll have their interpretation of a particular rule. One just recently was around the neck situation. Well, that's always been in, but then what some of the players became very skillful at doing was to drop the whole body and put an arm up so that when the fellow tackled him, it automatically went around his neck, and they were whatever the word is,
high tackle,
staging for a free kick.
Yes.
Well, then they changed that, and then the interpretation, and I think it even confused some of our what you call referees, judges. We call them umpires. But anyway, be that as it may, but they'll sort that out, and eventually. So it's still a very skillful game.
Okay, so you worked for a few years before you got into the insurance company. You worked for a few years in law enforcement.
Yes, I was living in Ballarat, and I was educated there. I went to high school, and then I had a couple of jobs as a clerk, a junior clerk, CLERK, paperwork. In other words, I suppose a lot of people would have become accountants on a wholesale grocery, and also what's known as Victorian Railways, working for the Ways and Works branch of the Railways before I joined the police force. And then after 3 years, I felt that I could better myself. So that's why I left to join this new in Australia, combined insurance company of America, who later on sold other insurance. But initially in Australia, they sold what was an accident insurance policy, which we sold in volume by calling on business houses between 9 and 5. And anyway, that's a long story. And did quite well with them. I had 9 years with them and learnt so much. So it was good education. Craig, when I fill out the appropriate forms, which are all nationalities you would do when they go from one country to another, whether you're on a cruise, aeroplane, or whatever, the little form for customs you fill out, and one of the things they ask you for, naturally, with your name, passport number, etc., they say occupation. I've always very proudly put salesman.
There you go. Okay. So did you ever, real quickly, and I do want to get to the insurance stuff there, but did you ever have an encounter as a police officer with a supporter of the ruse who, maybe was giving you a hard time? Yeah, because you weren't working as a police officer during the season, were you, or was that during the
yes. So
it
was a full-time job.
So it was so if you had a great game and you were arresting somebody for something as you're reading them their rights and you're putting the handcuffs on them and you're telling them, Barry, you really had a fantastic game the other night. That was, so glad I was able to be at the stadium. And do you think you could let me go? Or did that sort of thing ever happen?
Well, no, it didn't, because they were two separate things. I mean, it was just, they were two separate. That was my full-time profession. Mind you, all the people, particularly the opposition, not want to say all of them, most of them knew, and used to get when it was when the ball was down the other end of the ground and the crowd wasn't as large, and or there wasn't a lot of noise, you'd get I'd be described as get off the ground mug copper, where policemen weren't known here as coppers, or but I mean, you took it all the grade. Most times you didn't hear them because you were concentrating in my particular job on playing on the full forward to my job was, of course, to limit him to not kick any goals, which occasionally happened. And that was my job as a fullback, as a fully what you call defensive player, sorry, et cetera, et cetera. So no, two separate things. No, and I never had any situation. It was only 3 years, but it was great. I've always said that if I had my time over again, my life over again, as I said earlier, closer to 84, I would certainly still join the police force here because, and I think a lot of people listen to your program there, that have either in or have, say, been in one of your state police forces and maybe left, or alternatively spent their entire career. But I had my time over again. I certainly would have again joined the police force. Tremendous training. You learn so much, the disciplines and et cetera, et cetera. But and there's so many different branches and I mean, with law enforcement, which you emphasise a lot, So, but it was a very pleasing time, and I often talk to some of my squad members. We did 4 months training before we went out in full uniform, and I often talk. A lot of them have passed away, of course, because I was 20 years of age when I did my training and subsequently graduated in 1959. There's a few of my squad members with whom I did the training still alive, and I talk to some of them very often because we share that particular goal, being in the same squad, being trained.
Absolutely, yeah. I do the same thing with people that I served in the military with. So yeah.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so let me ask you this: do you think,
Yep.
had if you had not left law enforcement to go into insurance,
Yes.
you probably never end up in that position with the Roos in 1972, do you?
Well, that's another very good question, and you're quite right. I would not have. In fact, I'm going to be. I have been at a few speaking engagements over the journey, not professionally as such, but I return to Ballarat in next month, September, to speak at one of the sporting clubs, and then one of the things I'll commence with is our great well-known coach Ron Barassi. I think he got the saying from someone else, but it's a little saying that he had. It's 10 words, and all of which have only got 2 letters. TWO, 2 letters of the alphabet in it. If it is to be, it is up to me. I'll repeat that. If it is to be, it is up to me.
That's a great point.
with emphasis on the first word, if. So one of the little things I'll do, that's a very good question of yours. So if the emphasis on the if I had not left the police force, I would certainly not have joined the American Insurance Company. And if I hadn't have joined the American Insurance Company, where I learned a tremendous amount about selling, because the Americans are always very good at it, and teaching, and et cetera, and with the help of a lot of self-made books and authors and people, well-known Americans, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale being another one, Napoleon Hill, I mentioned W. Clement Stone, the boss of the company. That's where I learned through them, and attending a couple of conventions, the first of which was in 1965 in London at a convention, and then in 1969 in Hawaii, Oahu, actually. So yes, if I had not joined the American Insurance Company, I would not have gained the role of raising money, because at North Melbourne, or becoming full-time, because Alan, then at the time, he was president, Alan Aylett, and he said, well, look, we need someone. There was only one person full-time at the time, Craig, at all the clubs, one. Now some of them boast 150 up to 200. That's without the players and the coaching staff. And he said, we need someone to knock, the expression was to knock on doors to raise money, because we're known as poor old North, and to get off the bottom of the ladder, we need to raise some money and have someone to be able to compete with the other clubs. So that's my cup of tea, because I'd had a lot of experience in selling, and of course it was, when I say easy, I was very fortunate. We started, grew with the club, so it was just a pleasure for me to join the club full time and play that role, because it was a job. It was but it was just so pleasant to be there and growing with the club. Where in my first full season, full time, was 1972. We're out of 18 games. Correction, 22 games. We won one. O-N-E, one. And
I think I remember John Perry talking about that, because that was he had come over. He had come over from Richmond not long before that.
He had shown a very, very nice fellow. Yeah, that was interesting. He got on to John. Anyway, so that was my first full year, full time, one game. But then, whilst I had nothing to do with it, but the powers to, our senior people at the club, which were Alan Arlett, Albert Mantello, Ron Joseph, could see that things had to change. So that's when, about halfway through the 72 season, they learnt that Ron Barassi, who'd been very successful as a player and as a coach, might be enticed to come and join us, which did happen, and taking advantage of the 10-year rule, where Barry Davis, John Rantel, and Doug Wade came to us. And in our season under Barassi, 73, we won enough games just to finish outside of the finals. It was a final 5 then, and we didn't make the finals, but we certainly did in 74. Made the grand final, got beaten by a much better team in Richmond, which was also John Perry's original team. And then in 75, of course, we're all very fortunate to be part of, in my case, the off-field team, where we won our very, very first premiership, 1975, having joined the league the Australian Football League was then known as the Victorian Football League, but now Australian, in 1925. That was North Melbourne. So that, and then subsequently in 77. So yeah, so I was part of the off-field team, which was just, but it was a job. It was but it was just so pleasurable to be part of it and to grow with it. As I say, starting with one game win in 72,
right.
To 75, just a short period of time later, to win our very first premiership, playing against Hawthorn, one of the other two teams that we joined the league with back in 1925, being Hawthorn and it was known then as Footscray, now known as the
Bulldogs.
Western Bulldogs.
Yep. So you said that your job kind of consisted of knocking on doors. Is that really what was?
Well,
you were reaching out to businesses and that sort of thing, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the knocking on doors really was the expression we used.
Right.
But it was. I didn't really knock on it, because if I called, like I did with the American Insurance Company, selling this accident policy in volume, with lots of sales, et cetera, based on a formula called, we were selling a necessity, which was low in cost, which repeated regularly. Mr. Stone came up with that. He pinched that formula. There's so many companies like Uncle Ben's with dog's food, for example, Colgate, Palmolive, toothpaste, and so we didn't have to. We only called that in those days on businesses. The doors were all open. But what it meant was I would call on people, I'd go to see them, I'd ring them on the phone, but I mainly wanted to go and see them face to face. I'd always be dressed with a collar tie and a suit on, no matter how hot it was, so to speak, etc., asking them to join. What we were doing then, because we didn't have a lot of members and or special members, so what we were doing was to build our foundation to be a lot wider and a lot thicker, on which we wanted to build. A lot of people in business, they want to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, next door, and they get a bit of a base, but then the next minute they wanted to build too quickly, and because the foundation isn't strong enough, it crumbles. So what we were doing, in short, was that we were getting more and more people involved with the club, hopefully joining as special members, yes, and then also, so we already had some. We had a particular coterie game, but we had more special memberships. That was my job, to introduce, and then we opened it up to appeal to more companies to support. And even today, the principles are the same. There's six major. It's very different in America, I suppose, but there's six major areas in which money is raised over here, whether it be a football team, and or charitable organisations, and they're not necessarily in order, although in football the corporate dollar is very, very important, and probably the largest of the six ways of raising money. So you've got your corporate dollar, you've got your special memberships, people that are always prepared to pay a bit more. You have the same thing in America. You have special efforts, I call them, better word than raffles, but where people participate in a lottery type situation. You have your functions, and I'm sure they have those over in America. You have business enterprise, where you try and earn money outside of the normal sources of income within the club, and to go to other people not connected with the club necessarily. And I introduced when I say I have a sixth one now, and it's really, we've learnt a lot from America. And I think it was the Green Bay Packers. No, it wasn't. It was I'll think of them. It might have been some of the Bears. No, anyway, the side, the way of raising money, it comes under the heading of merchandising. And some of the clubs here now, I know that my own club does very well, bottom line, from merchandise. Heavens only knows what Collingwood do with their number of members. So that became a major source of income. And I'm trying to think of the Green Bay Packers, but I think quite a few years ago in America, of the NFL teams, one of them was so popular that of the 100 units, well, the 100%, 40-something percent belong to a particular club, because they're very big, aren't they? People
might have been it might have been the Dallas Cowboys at one time.
Yes, I reckon you're right. It was, yes, I think it was the Dallas Cowboys. Yes, they were very, very popular. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
terrible right now.
Or even the San Francisco 49ers,
Mhm.
going back to Joe Montana, was it, et cetera,
Right,
et cetera. Yeah, and so that's the areas of fundraising. That's what I really was, a
Okay.
fundraiser, but marketing, selling. But that's something that we did very successful. And of course, other clubs followed suit. Some earlier and some of the clubs nowadays over here have on their market. They have different divisions, of course, but on their marketing team, they probably have a goodly number of people because it's become so much larger and still dependent. All the football clubs here, outside of the contributions they receive from the Australian Football League, need to raise X amount of money themselves through, and they are still those 6 areas of fundraising. All clubs still raise money from each of those 6 major areas of fundraising that I mentioned. Hopefully, in the near future, there'll be no cause to have what I call special efforts. I mentioned it before, being raffles. I just, the lottery type situation, I just believe that should go out the door, et cetera, et cetera.
If I'm not mistaken, in the few years that I've been following the game, the clubs, it sounds like most of them have divested themselves from what they call the pokey machines.
Yes, you're quite right. Some
Yeah.
still have them, but in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, poker machines, I reckon they shouldn't have been introduced in this state anyway, but they were, and that's the way it is. And
Yeah.
I believe that poker machines were, which I know, the Las Vegas has got so many of them, but they pay out a high percentage of it. I think it's something like 97% that they pay out again. That's not the same here, but I don't believe the poker machine should ever have been allowed to go into the clubs. To me, that they were more for other organisations where they didn't have the same income coming in. The smaller people to provide facilities for the members of those respective clubs. Be that as it may, yes, most of them now are phasing out of that, and I think in the near future, none of the AFL teams will have, in due course, any poker machines at all.
So some of the things that you began doing when you joined the club again in 1972, these are the kinds of things that are going to be leading to what we now know as maybe like the corporate suites at the MCG and at Marvel Stadium.
Yeah.
So you were basically, because you were one of the first people to do this. You were basically the person that's kind of, as you said, building the foundation to do this, to help these clubs to bring in additional revenue, to bring in, and I don't know if you necessarily were, involved with like the signage that's encircling the grounds, where the advertising's on.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
But a lot of that stuff, that's way for the league to bring in more money, which then gets distributed to the clubs as well.
Right. So they're in charge of all that now. But back then, when I first joined, and as I mentioned, full time, the first club to do so. Prior to that, there was some fundraising went on, but by in an honorary way. And whilst there was already a coterie, we call them, a special membership, in our case called the Northerners, that was there. And they also had, what had already started, a lot of people think I did it, but I didn't. Our televised, well, it'd be late to be televised, but our then grand final day breakfast was there, started in 1965-66. So, but my job, and there were a few other little things. Now, and we even had company names on the back of dressing gowns, not even tracksuits. Anyway, so my job at the time was to take hold of what we were already doing, make them better, larger, bigger, more people involved, and then in each of the categories that I mentioned earlier, in due course, not necessarily in my first full year, but a little bit of each. My job was to introduce within those 6 frames, 6 areas, give them choice. We introduced more coteries at different levels to cater for the people. Yes, we did reach out to companies. In fact, we were very fortunate to be officially the first club to gain a full-time sponsor, which turned out to be a company called Courage Breweries, which came from England. And ironically, in the 5-year plan, they sponsored us in 1974. They started in 74. No, they started in 75, where they weren't allowed to wear any logos. But if you saw any of our jumpers, Courage, we were able to wear their red cockerel, the yellow background on our jumpers in 1976. But ironically, the first year of Courage being our sponsor, 75, we happened to win, as I said earlier, our very first premiership. So what my job was to do, and of course I was full-time, so therefore opposed to the previous people, there was only one person, his name was Bill Liddy, and he's still alive today, and we often talk about it, but he did it in an honorary capacity. But I mean, if I mentioned the figures that they produced, well, I can tell you, it's in our annual reports, it was was less than $20,000 for the whole year, bottom line. Now the clubs, some of the clubs more so than mine, we're talking millions and millions and millions millions of dollars from those same areas of fundraising. So the whole game and the number, the size of the memberships and the sponsorship and the league itself, and particularly with television rights, et cetera, where now they talk in terms of $1 billion plus for X number of years for the television rights. So it's sure as hell grown. So we are going back a little bit. It's so much different now, but it started back then, yes, and that's what was my job was. So yes, we did introduce some very novel ways. We worked on the premise, and I often talk about it, Craig, is that we would look, as long as it was fair and above board, we would look, we'd grab a group of people, have a think tank about things, and we would create a situation where we always wanted to introduce something new into the areas of fundraising. So we discuss it, and then what I teach, not as a teacher, but I say in short, that any idea that you come up with, as long as it is fair and above board, as long as you can answer yes to two questions pertaining thereto, and here's the two quick questions, and is it A, is it a good deal for the people participating? It's got to be a yes by 9/10 of the people, so to speak. Yes, it's a good deal. And is the bottom line, what stays in the till after a period of time, the net profit, is it consistent with the energies expended, if not in its first year, just like our breakfast, but certainly in our subsequent years on? Is it? And if the answer has to be yes, it's not much use having half a dozen people spending a whole year on a project to come up with a few $1,000s. So the answer would be no. So we end up doing special things like, well, off the top of my head now, we had rodeos, which we pinched the eye to. We had a night at the circus.
I heard you had an elephant.
Yes. Well, that was true. Yes. So that's very well recorded. Yes, that was in about 1978, 79. And the reason for the elephant on the ground against Collingwood in that particular game, preceding between the two games played, was to promote a night we had at the circus. In short, that was why the elephant was chosen. And of course, it's history now. And if you Google, you'll be able to find a film clip of how when the elephant, it'll be live for you, that came onto the ground. And then what actually happened, in short, was that it was led by we had a cheer squad member on its top, around us, behind its ears, and it was a very well-trained elephant, of course, and the handler looked after it. But when it went up a certain on the other side of the ground to turn around to come back, that was the time when Collingwood, with whom we were playing, came onto the ground.
No.
Yes, well, the elephant was probably used to say performing in front of a 3,000 or 4,000 size big marquee tent for a camp. But of the 32,000 that were there that day, I'd say that 30,000, that's a true story, followed Collingwood. So with a tremendous roar just when their team entered the ground, and of course the elephant panicked a little bit and took off. And we myself with a guy called Paul Jennings, who was a great entertainer, impersonator, we were up in the little box. Well, we were speechless, which is pretty hard to say for both Paul and I, because we could see what might happen with the elephant. Kept on going and went out from whence it came, because the crowd was so large. And we could see some accident. See, fortunately, and the film shows it, that the handler, incredibly, but to his credit, was able to control the elephant, and it stopped running as such and slowed down. But
okay.
Yeah, so it's well recorded, and it's yes, and people sort of we talk. It often gets a mention in the papers. Even just recently, I went and spoke on a radio program early one morning with some very well-known radio station with some well-known people, etc., to talk about it. But that was the reason why the elephant was to promote one of the many different projects that we tackled to make some money. We had a professional fight night at the ground.
You had a disco, concert. From what I hear too.
Yeah, oh yes, that was part of the social club. We had pop concerts with the lead person being at the time was Johnny Farnham, who actually does follow our club and still around, and a great singer, etc. So there were many wide and varied ways of raising money, some of which we didn't repeat, not necessarily because they weren't successful, but they might not have been appropriate. But I don't ever remember being involved. Some made a lot more money than others, but I don't ever remember being involved in anything. And I got help from a lot of people. We had some great thinkers.
Right.
Of any project we have had that didn't make some money. Now, we might not have repeated it. We would take advantage of certain situations. It might have been a centenary, or it might have been some special occasion, etc. But yeah, we were responsible for introducing many different ways of raising money from what we referred to as extracurricular activities. In other words, income coming in outside of the normal sources of income, which America would have. I mean, when you talk about super box or suites, yes, I personally now have 2 corporate suites at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which I lease. My company leases, and the one-man band, but leases from what's known as the Melbourne Cricket Club, and I let them out to organisations on a game-by-game basis, including finals, etc., as a way of just of keeping a little bit of work going at my age now. And I say this, Craig, the reason why I'm doing it is to keep my wife in the manner in which she's accustomed.
There you go.
Have you heard that one before?
I have heard that statement before. I've heard that line before. Yes.
I'm semi-joking, but
let me go back to the Barassi line there. If it is to be, it is up to me. But in this case, yes. Change the last word and make it thee. So it's up to thee.
That's a true story. So that was one of So with the emphasis on if then, and but there's so many things, and you could do it yourself. For your listeners, believe me, you could. I'll give you a couple of other examples to see if and it's true without going. But if my parents early on when I was a baby in arms didn't divorce back then, I wouldn't be speaking to you today. And there's a reason for that, because as a result of that, I was brought up by my mum, and then with the help of her mother, my grandmother on that side, I took us to a little place called Smarsdale, a very, very small country town outside of Ballarat. I would never have got to live there. Had that not happened, then I would not have lived in Ballarat. And if that not happened, I would not have been taught a bit about tennis, table tennis, and football, etc. So that's where I come back to. And my best one, Craig, with the if being the first word, if I had not have joined the Victoria Police Force, which was in 1959, I would not be married to and met my wife, Barbara, who's alive, well and kicking today. And I may have had some children later on, but they would not have been called Guy and Simone. So I say the if because I met my wife when I was a working policeman in uniform at a particular occasion, carols by candlelight on Christmas Eve in 1961 at the Sydney Myer Music Bowl. So in short, if I had not have joined the police force, I would not have met my wife, Barbara.
Wow. So I was thinking maybe you had given her a traffic citation or something there.
No, that didn't happen. Now, are you married, Craig?
I have been married for 27 years.
Let's say we talk about your marriage, your first wife. Now, if I were to ask you where you were together with your first wife, as an example, and your listeners could do this, I often do this, and I get the couple together, and I position myself in such a way that I can see the wife's face, the partner, full-time partner, but so I asked the question of the husband, but he cannot see the expression on his wife's face. So I say to them, by the way, when was the very, very first time that you met your wife? Now, you might not have spoken to her, you may have seen her, where was it? Now, generally speaking, the husbands aren't right, but the wives are. So when I ask the question of people, I look at, so a person will say, blah, 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 such and such, and I'm looking at the wife's face and she's nodding her head. And I say, apparently that's not right. And yes, it was. I went to a doctor. So you ask people, so now sometimes they do agree. Generally speaking, it could have been at a friend's place. In our time over here, back in the earlier days, it was possibly at a dance. We call them dance particularly in country towns or balls and God knows what. But there's a variety of ways that you meet your wife. But most times once they disagree, they forget about something. So if you were talking to your first wife today, I asked that the question: would you personally remember the very, very first time you met your first wife? Would you remember where you were?
You have put me in a really bad position because
And a big thank you to Barry for taking time out of his schedule to sit down to chat. Again, this was the first part of the interview. I'll be releasing part 2 very soon, probably tomorrow. I may work on it this evening before I head off to bed. We'll see how that works out, though. Remember, folks, you can find everything about the podcast over at my website, yankonthefooty.com. You can get on the mailing list. You can leave a review, which would be a huge help. If you really want to help out the podcast, leave a review. Let people know what you think about the show. Share it with your friends. Word of mouth is a huge, huge help in terms of getting more listenership. And if you want to help out the podcast, my Buy Me a Coffee page is over there as well. There's the store page as well if you want to get some gear for the podcast. You want to get a sticker for the back window of your car, or putting on the back of your computer, something like that to help promote the show. That'd be fantastic. And if you've done that, send me a picture of it and I'll share it out on my socials as well. So, folks, I do hope you'll head over to my website, yankonthefooty.com. Links to all my socials, my Facebook, my Instagram, my Twitter. Twitter's Yank_on. I do respond pretty much daily. If I do hear from you, my school year has started back up. So if you get on the mailing list, the new episodes will show up as quickly as they are released. Now, folks, please look out for one another. Give your friends and family a call to check up on them. Make sure they're okay. Tell them you love them. Reach out. And, folks, I do appreciate the kind words and the sharing of the podcast and the support that so many of you have given me. Again, if you haven't shared the podcast, I hope you'll consider doing that, because this is a labor of love for me. And again, I'm not going to be able to do a door knocking campaign or anything of that nature in Australia to suggest people listen. So your help on the other side of the planet is a huge help. And what actually was interesting, and I was a little stunned by this, I actually had somebody from Iran listen to 9 different episodes of the podcast this month. I've never had anybody from Iran listen to the podcast. That was very surprising. I mean, I've had, 49 out of the 50 states in the U.S. Nobody in Wyoming has listened yet. So, folks, again, thanks for the kind words. And as always, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I will catch you later. This has been episode 196 of A Yank on the Footy. Don't forget that you can reach me at yank_on or at yankonthefooty@gmail.com. Again, you can find me over there on Instagram and Facebook. Search out A Yank on the Footy or A Yank on the Footy podcast. And on Twitter at yank_on. I do hope you'll consider subscribing, and I do hope you'll share the podcast and leave me a review. That'd be great. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with part 2 of my interview with Barry Cheatley. Goodbye.